They thought burying me would be the end of the story, that the lies they spread about me would die along with me in that cheap coffin the town could barely afford. But I always knew the truth has a peculiar way of resurfacing, especially when you plant the right seeds in the right soil. My name was Robin Doman, and for 20 years I was a math teacher at Riverside High School, a public school tucked away in the middle of Kansas, in the tiny town of Millbrook. One of those towns where everyone knows everyone, where secrets spread faster than gossip in Martha's beauty salon, and where corruption grows quietly like weeds in a church garden. I grew up in Millbrook, the son of a mechanic and a retired nurse. My parents, Harold and Ruth Doman, taught me that honest work and education were the only things that truly mattered in life. Rob me, my mom used to say, you can take everything from a person except the knowledge they carry in their head. Prophetic words considering what was to come. At 22, I graduated with a degree in mathematics from Kansas State University and came back home with a clear goal: to transform education in Millbrook. I genuinely believed every child deserved a chance, no matter where they were born or how much money their parents had in the bank. I was young, idealistic, and completely naive about the way the world really worked. In 2004, at 25 years old, I met Helen Murphy at the town's summer festival. She was a librarian, with chestnut hair that shimmered in the sun and a smile that made me stutter like a teenager. Our first date was in the library itself, where I had gone to research new teaching methods. "Do you really believe you can change the world through math?" she asked, laughing, not cruelly, but curiously. "I'll try," I replied, and for the first time, someone didn't think my passion for education was silly. We got married the following year in a simple ceremony at the town's Methodist church, officiated by Pastor Williams, who had baptized half of Millbrook. Helen understood my dedication to work, supported me when I stayed late grading tests or preparing special lessons for struggling students. In 2012, our daughter Emma was born, a sharp little girl with blue eyes like her mother's. 3 years later came Lucas, a curious boy who, by age 5, was already asking why the sky was blue and whether dinosaurs really existed. Riverside High School was my second home. I'd arrive at 7 in the morning and leave after 6 in the evening. I knew every student by name, their struggles, their dreams. I took special pride in the annual Time Capsule Project, where senior students wrote letters to their future selves and buried meaningful objects in the school garden. "In 20 years, you'll come back here," I'd say every year, "and see how your dreams turned out." Robert Hayes arrived as principal in 2018. A tall man with graying hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He came from Chicago with promises of modernization and change. "We're going to transform this school," he announced at the first staff meeting. "New labs, a digitized library, tablets for every student." The words sounded great, but something about his demeanor unsettled me. Daniel Morrison, our mayor for the past 8 years, was the son of one of Millbrook's oldest families. He inherited the position almost as a birthright. Short, round, always dressed in suits far too expensive for a small-town mayor. "Morrison runs this town like it's his private estate," the old-timers would say. And I would soon find out that this was more literal than I ever imagined. In 2019, the first substantial federal education funds arrived. The Kansas Education Reform Initiative promised to revolutionize public schools across the state, and Millbrook was selected to receive $2.5 million over 3 years. The news was celebrated in the local paper, on community radio, and Morrison held a ceremony where he boasted of his competent leadership that had secured the investment. But months passed, And nothing changed at Riverside High School. The lab still had equipment from the 90s. The library ceiling leaked when it rained. And I was still teaching trigonometry with textbooks from 2005. When I asked Hayes about the timeline for improvements, he gave vague answers about bureaucratic processes and pending state approvals. By the end of 2019, my suspicion turned into certainty. During a PTA meeting, Victoria Foley, a retired accountant and mother of one of my students, casually said, "It's strange how my brother-in-law's school renovation company has never heard of Morrison and Associates, which is supposedly working on your campus." That comment planted a seed of doubt that would grow into a full-blown tree of suspicion. I started paying closer attention. The companies listed in the expense reports were always the same: Morrison and Associates, Hayes Educational Solutions, Midwest Learning Equipment. Generic names, addresses that, when discreetly checked, led to empty or non-existent offices. The figures were always too round, the descriptions too vague. That's how I discovered I was living at the center of one of the biggest education frauds in Kansas history. And that's how I sealed my fate. Investigating corruption in a small town is like trying to whisper in an empty theater. Every move echoes, every question reverberates. But I was a math teacher, and numbers never lie. They tell stories more honestly than any witness ever could. I started slowly, using my position at the school to access documents any teacher could legally review: monthly expense reports, supplier invoices, maintenance contracts. At night, after Helen and the kids were asleep, I'd lock myself in the makeshift office in our basement and organize everything into a spreadsheet. The pattern emerged like a mathematical equation. Every 3 months, exactly 70% of the federal funds disappeared into phantom contracts. Morrison and Associates charged $50,000 for strategic educational consulting, a service I never saw rendered. Hayes Educational Solutions billed $30,000 a month for advanced tech equipment that never arrived at school. Midwest Learning Equipment sold state-of-the-art science labs for $80,000, yet our students were still using microscopes from the 1980s. I needed more proof. In January 2020, during the school break, I volunteered to organize the administration's archive. "Mr. Doman has always been so dedicated," Hayes told the secretary. "Let him sort through the old paperwork." Had he known what I was really after, he never would have allowed it. That's where I found the first smoking gun. An invoice from Morrison and Associates, signed by Hayes, dated on a day he was officially attending an education conference in Denver. The handwriting was different, clearly forged. I photographed everything with my phone. Then came the addresses. Morrison and Associates was registered in the same office building as Morrison's private law firm, Suite 204. Hayes Educational Solutions, Hayes Residential Apartment. Midwest Learning Equipment didn't even physically exist. The address led to a vacant lot on the outskirts of Topeka. "Rob, are you okay?" Helen asked one night in February, finding me still awake at 2 a.m. "You've been acting strange, distant. The kids are starting to notice." I wanted to tell her everything, to share the weight of what I'd uncovered, but I knew involving her would be dangerous. "Just a school project," I lied, hating every word.
In March, I felt I was being watched. Hayes started showing up at the teacher's lounge whenever I was there. Morrison appeared at the school twice in 1 week, something he'd never done in my 20-year career. "Mr. Doman," he said during his second visit, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder, "I hear you've taken an interest in school administration. Just be careful not to wade into waters too deep." The threat was clear, but I had come too far to turn back. I had evidence of at least $12 million diverted over 5 years. Money that was supposed to be educating our kids was lining the pockets of 2 men who had sworn to serve the community. I decided it was time to act. In April, I reached out to Brett Grafton, an investigative reporter at the Kansas City Star, who had once won an award for exposing municipal corruption. We arranged to meet at a diner in Topeka, 2 hours from Millbrook. "Professor," he said after seeing some of the evidence, "this is huge, but we'll need more. Official documents, recordings, something airtight." I went back determined to get undeniable proof. That's when I made my fatal mistake, underestimating how fast predators can smell danger. The following Monday, Hayes called me into his office. "Rob," he began, using my first name for the first time, "the administration has decided you'd be more useful at Lincoln Elementary. It's a transfer, not a termination. You should be grateful." Lincoln Elementary was across town, in a low-income area with even worse infrastructure than Riverside. It was obvious. They were isolating me, cutting off my access to school records. "Why?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Orders from above," Hayes replied, not meeting my eyes. "Morrison thinks you need new challenges." I accepted the transfer because I had no choice, but I continued the investigation. At night, I returned to Riverside under the excuse of retrieving personal items I'd forgotten. It was during one of those late-night visits that I managed to photograph Hayes' computer, left open, displaying emails that confirmed everything. Messages to Morrison discussing resource reallocation, spreadsheets outlining the embezzlement, even jokes about clueless teachers who never suspect a thing. It was the evidence I needed. I called Brett Grafton the next morning. "Professor, perfect. We'll publish next week. Get ready, it's going to be an earthquake." But Morrison and Hayes were preparing their own earthquake. On Wednesday, April 15th, 2020, I was approached by 2 police officers in the Lincoln Elementary parking lot. "Mr. Doman, we need to search your vehicle. We received an anonymous tip." They found exactly what they were looking for. 2 bags of marijuana planted under the passenger seat. "That's not mine," I protested, but the words felt hollow even to me. In a small town, a teacher's word means little against physical evidence. The arrest was just the beginning. On Friday, Jessica Barnes, a 19-year-old former student, filed a formal complaint alleging that I had made inappropriate advances towards her during her high school years. By Monday, 2 more girls came forward with similar accusations, all curiously represented by the same attorney who worked at Morrison's law firm. "Rob, I don't know what to believe anymore," Helen said the night I returned from the police station after posting bail. She was sitting in the kitchen, Emma and Lucas already asleep, tears in her eyes. "The evidence, the girls, everyone's talking. Helen, you've known me for 15 years. Do you really believe I could do something like this?" Her silence was more painful than any accusation. The court of public opinion was swift and brutal. The Millbrook Gazette ran headlines like "Respected Teacher Accused of Multiple Crimes" and "Scandal Shakes Faith in Local Education." Parents pulled their kids from my classes. Former colleagues avoided eye contact. At church, families would change pews when I sat down. Brett Grafton called the following Tuesday. "Professor, I'm sorry, but I can't publish the story right now. With these allegations against you, any article I write would look like a distraction attempt. My editor won't go near it."
In 2 months, I lost everything. My job, obviously. No school in Kansas would hire me with those charges hanging over me. My friends vanished like mist. Helen filed for divorce in June, taking Emma and Lucas to her mother's house in Wichita. "I need to protect the kids," she said, unable to meet my gaze. I was left alone in a house that echoed with memories of children's laughter and family dinners. My bank account withered, drained by lawyers who couldn't prove my innocence because the evidence against me was technically valid, even if planted. But I wasn't completely defeated. In those lonely months, I refined my plan for revenge. If I couldn't expose the truth in life, I would ensure it came to light after my death, and I knew exactly how to make that happen. Every year for the past 20 years, I'd led the senior class time capsule project. It was tradition to open the capsule 5 years later in a ceremony attended by the whole community. The 2020 capsule would be opened in 2025. Plenty of time for the dust to settle, for Morrison and Hayes to lower their guard. In May, while I was still officially employed, though suspended, I buried my own capsule in the school garden, not in the traditional spot, but in a specific location I discreetly marked. Inside, my laptop with all the digital evidence, flash drives with backups of everything, photographs of documents, secretly recorded conversations with Hayes, and a letter explaining the entire conspiracy. But that wasn't enough. I had to make sure the capsule would be found at the right time by the right person. That's when I wrote to Jennifer Walsh, my favorite former student, now an investigative journalist in Kansas City. In the letter, I told her about the school's time capsule tradition and suggested she do a piece on how school customs continue even after tragedy. I casually mentioned it might be nice to invite former students to the 2025 ceremony. I sealed the letter and placed it in a drawer, along with instructions for it to be mailed automatically if something happened to me. I had a friend in Topeka, Margaret Foster, who had promised to handle my affairs if I died. She didn't know about the letter, only that there were posthumous instructions to follow. The stress of those final months was unbearable. I woke up at 4 a.m. with chest pain, went days without eating properly, felt my heart race every time I heard a siren. Helen called occasionally to talk about the kids, but the conversations were tense, filled with heavy silences. "Is Daddy sick?" I heard Lucas ask in the background during one of those calls. Helen replied, "Your dad is going through a tough time." And I knew that was how she explained to them why their father had vanished from their lives. The morning of November 3rd, 2020, was as gray as my mood. I woke up with that familiar pain in my chest, my constant companion in the past few months. But this time it was different, more intense, radiating down my left arm like claws squeezing my heart. I was still in my pajamas when the pain worsened. I tried to reach the phone to call for help, but my knees gave out in the middle of the living room. The last conscious thought I had was about Emma and Lucas. They are going to grow up believing their father was a criminal. I died alone on the living room floor at the age of 45. The victim of a massive heart attack brought on by the stress of having my life destroyed by lies. It wasn't until 2 days later that my next-door neighbor, Mr. Peterson, discovered my body, after noticing I hadn't picked up the newspaper from the driveway. The funeral was a cruel farce. Few people attended. Helen brought the kids more out of obligation than affection. Emma cried quietly, while Lucas, then 9 years old, looked confused as to why everyone whispered when they glanced at him. A few former colleagues came out of courtesy, but kept a respectful distance, as if my ruined reputation were contagious. Morrison and Hayes had the audacity to show up, feigning sorrow. "Robin was a dedicated educator," Morrison said into the microphone. "Although his final years were troubled, we hope he finds peace." The hypocrisy would have killed me if I weren't already dead. Pastor Williams, who had known me since childhood, did what he could to keep the ceremony respectful, but even he seemed uncomfortable. "Robin Doman devoted his life to education," he said, choosing his words carefully, "and we hope his family finds the strength to move forward." They buried me in the Millbrook Municipal Cemetery, in a modest section, with a simple headstone, Robin Doman, 1975-2020. Teacher and father. They couldn't even bring themselves to write beloved before father. The scandal had stained even that. But death, I learned, isn't the end when you've planted the right seeds. In the 5 years that followed, Millbrook carried on as usual. Morrison was re-elected mayor unopposed in 2022, promising continuity and responsible growth. Hayes expanded his influence, becoming superintendent of the entire school district. They kept embezzling funds, now with even more confidence, believing the only man who could ever expose them was dead and buried. Helen remarried in 2023 to a Wichita accountant named David Miller, a good man from what I could tell. Emma, now 17, was in her senior year of high school and planning to study journalism. Lucas, at 14, had inherited my love for math. They rarely mentioned my name, and when they did, it was with the quiet shame of children who believed their father had been disgraced. Margaret Foster, faithful to my instructions, mailed the letter to Jennifer Walsh in December 2024. Jennifer, now an award-winning investigative journalist, was intrigued by the suggestion to cover Riverside High School's traditional time capsule ceremony. She had no idea she was being led to uncover the story of a lifetime. The morning of May 15, 2025 was perfect for a school ceremony. The sun shone brightly in the cloudless Kansas sky. The Millbrook community gathered in the garden of Riverside High School for the traditional opening of the 2020 time capsule, the last one I had supervised before the scandal. Morrison spoke first, of course. "This tradition represents our continuity," he declared, sweating under the sun but smiling broadly for the cameras. "Even after personal tragedies involving certain educators, our community remains strong." His indirect reference to me drew murmurs from the crowd. Hayes, now completely white-haired, but with the same arrogance in his eyes, grabbed the mic. "Mr. Doman started this tradition," he said, trying to sound gracious, "and it's only right we honor his memory, despite everything that happened afterward." More murmurs, some disapproving glances toward my family. Emma and Lucas sat in the front row with Helen and David. My daughter looked visibly uncomfortable with the mentions of my name, while Lucas stared intently at the ground. Helen wore a neutral expression, but I knew that look. She would rather be anywhere else. Jennifer Walsh was there with a small film crew, documenting the event. She had brought along a few of my former students, now young adults, including Michael Rodriguez and Victoria Chen, who had become an engineer and a doctor, respectively. They remembered me fondly, but also with the confusion that comes from hearing someone you admired was accused of terrible things. "And now," Hayes announced solemnly, "we open the 2020 time capsule, buried by Mr. Doman as his final project." 2 school staff members began digging in the traditional area, but they found nothing. They tried other spots, growing more confused with each failed attempt. "It's supposed to be here somewhere," Hayes muttered, starting to sweat for reasons beyond the heat. That's when Victoria Chen, my former student, spoke up. "Mr. Doman always said traditions could evolve. He taught us that sometimes the greatest discoveries are where we least expect them. I remember on the last day of class, he was digging near the oak tree. He said he was planting seeds for the future." All eyes turned to the old oak in the corner of the garden. Jennifer Walsh, guided by sharp journalistic instinct, suggested they check that spot. Hayes reluctantly agreed. 10 minutes of digging revealed my true time capsule. When they opened the waterproof metal box, the first visible item was my laptop, carefully sealed in plastic, with a note taped to the front. To whoever opens this capsule, here is the truth about what really happened in Millbrook. Play the file The Final Truth first. Robin Doman, a teacher honest to the end. The garden fell into complete silence. Hayes was pale as wax. Morrison was sweating profusely. Jennifer Walsh instantly realized she had stumbled onto something extraordinary. "Maybe this should be opened privately," Morrison nervously suggested. But the crowd was already demanding to see the contents. Emma stepped forward, hands trembling. "We want to know what my father left behind," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. Jennifer connected the laptop to a projector she had brought for the event. The large screen set up for the ceremony displayed my recorded image, sitting in my home office, clearly ill but resolute. If you're watching this, it means the time for the truth has finally come.
What followed was the complete implosion of 5 years of carefully constructed lies. My 40-minute video laid out every aspect of the conspiracy with mathematical precision. I presented evidence of the embezzlement, explained how Morrison and Hayes created shell companies, exposed the secret bank accounts where they hid millions stolen from education. More importantly, I revealed how they orchestrated my downfall to silence the one person who had uncovered their scheme. Jessica Barnes was paid $20,000 to lie about me, my voice said as documents appeared on screen. The other girls were each paid $15,000. Here are the checks, signed by Morrison, deposited into their accounts 3 days before the accusations. The crowd watched in growing shock. Helen had her hands over her face, tears slipping through her fingers. Emma held her brother's hand, both watching as the father they thought they knew was transformed again, this time back into the honest man I had always been. The drugs were planted in my car by Jake Morrison, the mayor's son. He confessed everything in a video I secretly recorded during a conversation where he thought he was intimidating me. The clip of Jake, drunk at a party, bragging about how he had helped his dad get rid of that annoying teacher, especially stunned his own family, who were present at the ceremony. Hayes tried to flee once he realized what was being revealed, but Michael Rodriguez and other former students surrounded him. Morrison stood frozen, his red face clashing with his graying hair. Jennifer Walsh kept filming, fully aware she was witnessing the kind of story that defines careers. In real time, she called state and federal authorities, reporting evidence of massive fraud and obstruction of justice. "Emma Lucas," my recorded voice said, looking directly into the camera as if I could see them. "Your father was never the man they said I was. I'm guilty only of believing education could change the world, and of underestimating how far greedy men will go to protect their crimes. I hope that one day you'll be proud of my name again." Morrison and Hayes were arrested 3 hours later in front of the entire town that at once condemned me. The subsequent federal investigation uncovered more than $15 million embezzled over 8 years, money that was supposed to transform education in 3 counties. Jennifer Barnes and the other young women were summoned to testify. Confronted with undeniable proof that they had been paid to lie, they confessed everything. Jessica, now 24 and a mother of 2, publicly wept as she begged forgiveness from Mr. Doman's family and from all the children who suffered because of our lies. The scandal became national news. "Dead Teacher Exposes Corruption Through Time Capsule" was the headline in the Kansas City Star, Washington Post, and CNN. Jennifer Walsh won a Pulitzer Prize for her coverage. But most important to me, my family got my name back. Helen cried for days, devastated by the guilt of having doubted me. "How could I have believed those lies?" she asked during a visit to my grave, as if I could answer her. "You knew me for 15 years. Emma changed her college focus to law, inspired to make sure injustices like the one that happened to my father never happen again. Lucas, now proud of the Dolman name, pursued a career in education. Riverside High School was completely renovated using the recovered funds. They built a library in my honor, Robin Dolman Memorial Library, where truth always finds its way. My revenge was complete. The truth had won, even if I wasn't alive to see it triumph.